SecretCon, thanks for coming. My name is David Bryan, and I'm here to talk to you about hardware hacking. No. There was a mix-up in schedules, and we just swapped time. So if you want to see David Bryan tomorrow, first thing, 10 a.m. In the meantime, I will entertain you with some sad but true facts about cloud security. Whether you like it or not, you are on a cloud security team. And like all good talks, the origin story came about by people asking me a question that I didn't really know how to answer, or the answer made me really uncomfortable. And the question was, should I create a cloud security team in my organization? What should they be doing? Who should they report to? Who are these cloud security people? And having worked in cloud security for a number of years, you think I would be able to answer this question. And it just really wasn't a straightforward answer. And so I decided to do the most pedantic thing possible. And that's slowly explain each one of the capabilities of an enterprise security organization. We're going to go through 15 of them. 15 capabilities within an enterprise security organization. Talk about what changes with the cloud. So what's new with the cloud? What stays the same? What about their job is going to be totally transformed with the cloud? And what is kind of old hat? What about, say, incident response is going to be totally new? And what new tooling might they need? And what new skill sets might they need with cloud adoption? And hopefully, as we slowly go through each one of these capabilities, we can understand better that question that kept perplexing me. Should I make a cloud security team? Because as we see, we probably already have a bunch of teams in any large enterprise. So should I make another one? Let's find out. As I go through each team, each capability, feel free to raise your hand. Just be like, me. Raising like, Hufflepuff. Yes, that's me. The first one I'm starting out with is incident response. Any responders in the audience? Got some responders. Your mission is to detect, mitigate, and respond to incidents. Reduce the damage that they may cause. So what's going to change for you in the cloud? Well, the log variety is going to explode, right? So much more data to go through. And yet, the trusty host layer is really diminishing because VMs in the cloud are just so much more difficult to instrument, right? They have an ephemeral nature. And try hooking EDR into those things. It's a pain, if not impossible, right? So the handy-dandy host layer logs are gone. But you're having this explosion of cloud layer logs that all of a sudden matter, right? The consistency for you, though, is that it's really inconsistent. And you're accustomed, hopefully, to these log inconsistencies. Tracking through these logs, you're going to have to know how the identities are moving through each of the various cloud planes, right? Maybe previously you're having to trace identities through Active Directory and try to look at host layers. Now you're looking them across different clouds and understanding how they can, kind of shake and bake their way through a cloud, right? Same but different. And for new tooling, incident responders often are going to be going to those cloud native data lakes, because those are going to be faster and easier a lot of times to do your initial triage instead of going to your older SIMs that take a longer time to respond to. Hi, question there.
I was in a team that had the situation that you're describing. We ended up using our SIM because our cloud native tools didn't allow us to get full visibility across regions and across the cloud and not. So
yeah,
we ended up still going with SIM.
Yeah, more of a comment here is that, the tooling that she was using was more of the SIM because it aggregated the logs across all of the, silos. So her team went back to the SIM to do queries. You still might end up going to those edges, right, to do that initial triage and at least know that those repositories exist, because those can be your quick lookups to validate. Is something really happening? Okay, I need to go to my data warehouse then to do my validation between across your poly clouds. So yeah, incident responders, things are changing for you. A little bit of a cousin, the threat hunters, right? This is your proactive folks. There's just more and more places for an attacker to hide in the cloud, more and more ways for them to persist, unique ways for an attacker to persist. You're not necessarily evaluating protocols to see if you can, find that bit of malicious traffic in egress. You're hunting for those persistence mechanisms that are along the cloud plane. And again, they can be really, endless. In fact, if you factor in AWS and GCP and Azure. When you're looking for, network traffic in the cloud, the hunters and the incident responders, anybody who's tasked with the post-incident side of the world, is going to be probably sorely disappointed with the available network logs. Because the cloud providers are only going to expose the metadata about your network. Unless you're implementing some kind of custom solution that's going to intercept your traffic and you're going to get full packet capture, that's going to be the unusual case. Mostly what you're going to find when you're going to have to dig into what happened on this VM, at best, if somebody turned on the switch and flipped it and said, give me some logs, you're going to get metadata. It's not going to be a ton of help for you. Again, not a ton of help from your host layer logs. But the mindset you need as a threat hunter in the cloud is that you're not borked. You aren't. You might have more limited visibility in those traditional areas where you're accustomed to in the host layer and on the packets. But you have this whole other layer called the cloud plane, which is just as powerful and oftentimes easier for an attacker to pivot through for their targets. So you just have to move your focus. You have to move your focus away from your steady host layer logs over to your cloud plane logs. And for the threat hunters, you're still just looking for your needle in a haystack. And you're still just doing log analysis at the end of the day. That's your life, and it doesn't change with the cloud. Do we have any detection engineers? I cosplay as one sometimes. If you're interested in detection engineering, we can definitely talk. I put out a tool earlier this year to validate detection rules in the cloud called the DERF. I'd love to talk to anybody who's interested in rule validation specifically, because not only does the detection engineer write the rules, but probably half the time it's just validating, are these rules correct? Are these triggering on what we expect them to? And with the cloud, you're not digging through this amorphous bit of packets where you're trying to find some unusual, TCP layer information. You're looking for patterns of use, and you're looking for unusual patterns of use. So with the cloud, everything just comes up to layer 7, and that's where you stay, right? And so the detection engineer in the cloud needs to set aside their DNS evaluation, set aside inspecting egress for some malicious packets, and move up to layer 7 and just kind of live there, because you're looking for unusual access. And because you're just always working against APIs, actually testing your rules can be a lot easier, honestly, for the cloud. So even malicious actors in the cloud are going to be using these APIs of the cloud as a normal user. So that's like the change of mindset. The change of mindset is not malicious use, but normal use, but in an unusual way, right? I'm not sure if this is really new tools, but certainly Terraform and Python are the tools of the trade for a detection engineer, right? They're part engineer and part sleuth. So having a tool chain of all of the cloud provider CLI tools, plus being able to write some very much non-production Python is what's needed for a detection engineer. Anybody do forensics investigations? Whoa, you do everything. No. Okay, so in the cloud, you're not going to be having any evaluation of physical evidence. Everything's going to be remote collection. Even if there is a host, right? There might not be a host. The good thing with this is that, this is not going to be the first time somebody in a forensics team has seen a disk snapshot, right? If you can get to the point of getting a disk snapshot in the cloud, this is going to be old hat, because VM and virtualization has been around for much longer than the cloud. So making that transition should be relatively easy. However, and a big however, getting that disk snapshot from the cloud is the hard part. So I'll underscore with the new mindsets and the new skill sets for a forensics team. You're going to have to become part-time engineers. You're going to have to get your hands dirty with triage and that building that collection pipeline, understanding how to request the permissions, the access, and do the snapshotting long before you ever needed the access, right? So you need to be able to work with architecture and be able to work with your partners, maybe in DevSecOps, to get that access ahead of time. A lot of your time is going to be spent not on your forensics work, but on engineering a way for you to potentially even do your forensics work. Hooray.
When it comes to storing the snapshots, I'm sure some organizations actually have the regulatory requirements for retention of your data, but storing those snapshots for forensic purposes could be very expensive in the cloud. So how should our forensics teams approach the cost of snapshot?
Yeah, the question is, how should folks approach the cost of storing a snapshot, right? And so I'm assuming you're thinking about this from the pattern of, we just take a snapshot. We are just snapshotting because in case something happens, we can pull that. There's a couple things there. One, don't preemptively take the snapshot. That's one option, right? It's always a cost-benefit analysis. Don't preemptively take the snapshot, but have the mechanism in place to take a snapshot should you have some suspicion of malicious activity on a host. You can then you can take it at that point. Another opportunity is to move those snapshots through lifecycle rules in AWS and just move that out into Glacier. The older the snapshots become, you put it in cheaper and cheaper storage, and then eventually you just age it out. So you do proactively do some snapshots, but you just put them on ice and then eventually just can them, and you make the cost benefit analysis that we're going to only keep so many snapshots. You have to kind of weigh the costs there. Very good questions. It's all cost money, guys. It's a big scam. Big scam. Anybody work with Intel? Right? So Intel kind of ranges. I mean, it's a huge range of what Intel means to people, but like in an enterprise environment, often they're not creating their own indicators and they're not creating their own fresh intelligence. They're taking in indicators from third parties and then they're layering on context specific to the organization. That's mostly what you see happen in an enterprise. Very unusual that they're going to fund their own unique indicators that they publish out. But what an indicator means in the cloud just becomes really different. An indicator on-prem is going to be, maybe a piece of malware that you can hash, that you can signature, that you can publish out and people can scan for. In the cloud, most attacks are not going to involve any piece of malware, right? There's nothing that you can signature and then get a hash for. It's going to be, again, patterns of use, behaviors. So an indicator might be a certain pattern of API access coupled with potentially maybe an API an IP or a domain. But again, even looking back at indicators like IP and domain, very, very low on that pyramid of pain there. Typically, we see attacks in the cloud to be much more bespoke and not these like big sprays, right? When you have big sprays, you can kind of like see, okay, here's our bad IPs, here's the domains that are happening, and you can just like, block those. But in the cloud, they tend to be a lot more bespoke and targeted, and so IPs and domains tend to be less valuable as pieces of shared intelligence. What's going to stay the same if you are on an Intel team and all of a sudden your organization adopts the cloud? You're still going to have basically the same day-to-day. And your day-to-day is going to be reading breach notifications, reading reports from Mandiant, trolling icky corners of the web. You're going to be reading and reporting a ton. And so there's really not any new tooling that you need, but you do need that shift of mindset to understand that what an indicator might be is really patterns of use rather than a signature of a piece of malware. Any friends in insider risk? Insider risk, anybody? My favorite friends of insider risk? No. Insider risk is hard mode in the cloud, right? Because there are all of these cloud-hosted repositories of data now with tons of mechanisms for data exfiltration, right? So all these new repositories need constant scanning and monitoring for bits of company data just floating out into the ether. This is a very similar approach to an insider risk team needs to take now. Now, in an on-prem world, you still have to take a data-centric approach. You still have to take the approach of, well, who's accessing the data, where is it moving, what's in the data, and that's the same true with the cloud. But your mindset needs to change a little bit on the varieties of ways that data can move, especially between clouds, between services, right? That intra-cloud movement. A lot of this data is not going to land on people's workstations. When you're moving data, it's not necessarily going to be caught on your network. So those were the two primary spots insider risks relied on for scanning: endpoints and the network. Right? Moving data from one S3 bucket to another S3 bucket touches neither of those locations. So you need to understand now what. There's a lot of new tooling in this space because people are understanding that the cloud is huge and we could spend our entire lives and not secure it properly. So maybe we should just focus on the data and see if we can get that. So Insider Risk has a lot of new tooling around cloud DLP scanning. So scanning for data loss and PII, PCI, that kind of thing, but in a cloud native way. Also, there's a lot of new tooling around user behavior analytics, kind of a spooky term. Where your behavior will be profiled and they'll understand how you normally act with company data, and you will be assigned a risk score, and Insider Risk will understand if you're interacting with things in a fishy sort of way. Where's my GRC? Nobody will ever admit they're in GRC. We are all in GRC. Some of the coolest people I know are in GRC. New frameworks, new infrastructure, new frameworks, right? You got to build a benchmark. How do you know what's good? GRC has a couple new benchmarks to work with, the CIS benchmarks and the Cloud Control Matrix from CSA. They're going to be using these new benchmarks to understand if what their organization is building meets best practices. Huge word of caution to the GRC folks as their company moves into the cloud. The word of caution is around just their ways of working. I love my GRC folks, but they have a way of just plodding through. And this is the nice way to call it is waterfall, right? They have a very laser focused lens, and we're going to one by one tackle these things. And that's just not how cloud and cloud adoption works. Cloud and cloud adoption work is transformative, it is agile, it is fast. And there's generally two options. There's keep up or get left behind. And I don't like it that that's the fact, but unless you're in a highly regulated environment, GRC needs to rethink how they move. And it might not be A, then B, then C, then D, then E. It might have to be in a more agile method. Yeah, common question and concern. Why did I distinguish unless you're in a highly regulated environment? In a highly regulated environment, there are serious consequences, as in jail time, for actual individuals who are operating the cloud if they don't have every last duck in the row before deploying an infrastructure. Given that level of regulation, GRC has a ton of leverage to do things A, then B, then C, then D, then E. Cool. Don't apologize for being the questioner. I like it. I also don't know what time. Oh, it's 2:42. Okay. Well, we'll figure it out. Third-party risk. Third-party risk. Vendor management. So the vendor management process is probably pretty broken. Questionnaires about vendors never worked. They didn't work before the cloud. They won't work after. What you really need to focus on if you're in third-party risk and your organization is moving to the cloud is focusing on what kind of access that vendor is requesting into your cloud environment. Focusing on whether or not they're asking for read access or write access. If they're asking for read access, what kind of read access? Read access on just of metadata or read access of your data plane? And answering that question is not nearly as straightforward as you'd imagine. The cloud providers don't expose that to you. In fact, The read-only managed policy in AWS has a lot of unfortunate side effects that allow the holder of that policy to read on the data plane, read actual data. So the third-party risk team is the front line to say, vendor, what you're requesting is over the line, more permission than we would agree to, and to know how to scope that access down. Ditch the questionnaires, focus on the access, focusing on understanding what kind of access control plane or data plane. Who's on a crypto team? We got a crypto team. Sorry, guys. Apologies. So encryption at rest is now available to literally any Joe Schmo who wants to deploy into the cloud. And isn't that swell? But you need to get ahead of your development teams and provide them with a secure, centralized pattern so that people just don't come up with their own random key management solutions off of the cloud providers' services. What stays the same in crypto? There's always a backing key somewhere. Ultimately, you are protecting the access control against the backing key. Sometimes in the cloud, that is offloaded from you, right? So if you have, say, an AWS managed key, AWS deals with the access controls of that key. As opposed to a customer managed key, now it's your responsibility to handle the access controls. But ultimately, yes, there is a backing key. Homework for you all in crypto teams, read the white papers put out by the cloud providers. Understand the controls that they have around their HSMs, understand the controls they have around their hypervisors. Get comfortable with that so you can make a good informed decision on whether or not your organization takes advantage of Cloud HSM, takes advantage of Secrets Manager, right? So you're offloading a lot of that hardware that used to be under your control to AWS. They provide some really detailed explanation on their methods of control. Read it, get to know it, love it, and then make your own decision on whether or not they do it better or you can do it better. They can do it better. Oh, I am. Anybody on identity teams? Woohoo. Everybody's on an identity team. Your primary focus should be, your primary shift in scope is that you're now going to be focused on extending your identity to the cloud, extending the scope of authorization to the cloud, but be careful. Be careful because you can only take that so far. Understand where you can centralize authorization within your, your AD, your Azure Active Directory, your Okta. Understand where you can centralize that and have that be the source of truth. And when the cloud provider just has to take over with authorization, and some of that logic has to live elsewhere. And so understanding where that line is drawn will get you far. Patch management, who's my scanners? Scanners. You're gonna get a lot more scanners. You're gonna get scanners for your cloud plane. You're gonna get scanners for your hosts. You're gonna get scanners for your containers, for your serverless. And your mission is going to grow. It's going to grow to include all of those misconfigurations that are the #1 cause of cloud breaches, right? So most likely the definition of a cloud misconfiguration is going to expand to include, the definition of a vulnerability is going to expand to include cloud misconfigurations. With that, you're going to get a whole new set of tooling, but your ways of working is going to be very similar. You're going to be facilitating remediation with other teams, be running scans, running reports, and you're going to be basically managing that remediation process. Pen testing, application security. Where are my pen testers? Sweet. This is where I started my life, as application security. That's near and dear to my heart. And it's probably the reason why I got into cloud, because more and more applications were being hosted on the cloud, and there was consequences for that. There was consequences in the application layer vulnerabilities, which then had impact onto the cloud. Previously, if you had some vulnerability, if you had a server-side SSRF vulnerability, the impact might be just contained to that application, right? But now in the cloud, you can expand that impact of that vulnerability to include everything potentially in that cloud account, or everything that that application is then permission to give. And if your application is over permission, well, you're just off to the races. It's a blast, it's a pen tester. But you have to be able to communicate that risk to the application owners and also the cloud dev teams, so they understand the correlation between the underlying cloud infrastructure, the permissions that are being assigned, and the applications that are being run on them. So having this situational awareness as a pen tester, as an application security person, having that situational awareness of like, what's beyond my application? Okay, there's the application, but like, what's beyond that? Is it an S3 bucket? Is it a Kubernetes cluster? Do I have some other containers next to me? Having that situational awareness will inform your test, will help you be a better tester. You can describe impact better downstream. You can cause all sorts of mayhem. It's fantastic. Security architects. These folks probably have the biggest change. I really do feel for them. Because as your tech stacks change, so does your attack surface. And it's not just like one change. It's not just like there's on-prem and then there's cloud and here's the change to your attack surface. The attack surface changes for every different kind of service model, from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS. It changes between cloud providers on what matters and what doesn't. So security architecture has, I think, the most uphill climb in this shift from on-prem to cloud. But if there's any bright light for security architects, is that good, secure design is still just about managing complexity. Whether it's an on-prem or in the cloud, what you're trying to do is manage complexity in a secure, explainable way. So if you hang on to those core principles and you say, I'm going to make sure that there's least privilege, I'm going to make sure that there's defense in depth, I'm going to make sure that there's sane, rational defaults. Even if I don't know much about the cloud, I'm going to try to bake those things in. You're going to be okay. And the mindset is just serenity, right? Right? Just accept the things you cannot change. That's the most important skill forever as a security architect. Know what you can change, know what you can't change, and accept it. Who are the leaders? We're all followers, every one of us. The cloud really can accelerate burnout in a serious way. So everybody's mission is going to change, most likely just grow. And most of your team is not equipped to secure the technologies. Most of your team doesn't understand the technologies that they're being asked to secure. Everybody's still being asked to do more with less. And you still need to set the expectation that the cloud is everybody's responsibility, even if it's burning everybody out. So what do you need to do? You need patience, you need empathy, and you need to meaningfully set aside time for training, not just like, a couple hours a month, but like large blocks of time for deep focus. I'm not telling everybody to send everybody to a $10,000 training, but I'm saying like huge chunks of time. because this is just a monumental shift for the vast majority of people who have gotten really good at one thing, and now you're asked to be doing something completely different. It was 15. Did I not cover somebody? Was there somebody who was like, yeah, I work in enterprise security and you forgot me? Okay, cool. So what about this cloud security team? Should we create like a 16th capability now? I don't know, maybe. If you did want to create a cloud security team, like what would they even do? That's not a rhetorical question. What would they even do? They might, there's a couple possibilities, okay? So they might just be like the SMEs across the organization, right? It's everybody's responsibility to the cloud. Everybody needs to know cloud, but the cloud security team is like the extra SMEs, maybe. Maybe they like liaison between the cloud owners and the people who are actually building the cloud and security. And then maybe they do some of the more in-depth research on the security services and kind of like communicate best practices. Those are a couple things I can think of. But I much prefer the other approach of enabling your existing folks and your existing capabilities, because it's not a fad, it's just, the new way of working most likely. So you can't just create this cloud security team of 3 people and say, well, like, now you do forensics and incident response and security architecture and detection engineering and no. Got like 2 more slides here. Actually, just 1 more. As I was putting these together, a couple like skills and mindsets like kept popping out to me, like I kept repeating them over and over again. So, this is maybe a takeaway. If you generally want to learn about cloud, I would focus on learning about the cloud services in general. What do they do? Depending on if you're a security architect, you're a security leader, third-party risk, you might need to know just sort of cursory about them. Or if you're, say a pen tester or IR, you might need to know a little bit more in depth. Know really strongly the difference between the cloud service models, how that changes the attack surface. Get your hands dirty with the CLI tooling, open a cloud account. Don't use the GUI, download the CLI tools, build stuff from the command line.
Use somebody else's credit card.
Use somebody else's credit card. Actually, yes, but there's something great about the fear of your own credit card that really, I'd have to say. Also, the first thing you can learn is how to set budgets. That could be the first service you learn. Open it up with your own credit card and set a $50 budget and limit yourself. So, lesson 1.
I wish they taught that on my most recent SANS class.
Yeah, which one?
It was the cloud security automation.
Okay, I'll have a talk with them. Yeah, all right, we'll have a talk. Yeah, and the last kind of big overarching skill that popped up for me was like, this cloud control plane is the new OS, it's the new fabric, it's the new mechanism which attackers move on, it's the new vulnerability layer. Understand it, know it, love it, however you pop into it, whether it be through security architecture or IR. This is going to be, this layer is likely going to be replacing, say, a host layer for you in importance, so know it and love it. That's all I have. I think I have a couple minutes for questions. That's it. If anybody has any questions, you can just shout them out. Cool. Thank you so much for coming, everybody.